Chapter 201. Chapter 201 To Stand on Trial. Xiao Xiao quickly returned from fetching water while at the same time seemed to have given some instructions to those outside. Realizing that it would either be the genie guards or Lian Qiao and the other maids, Zhang Ruan was somewhat embarrassed. Thus Zhang Ruan was startled when Xiao Xiao walked to the edge of the bed and was about to bend over to pick her up. She asked, "What are you doing? Since you don't want the maidservants to serve you, I'll carry you over to freshen up." Xiao Xiao replied good-naturedly. "No need." Zhang Ruan lifted the quilt and was about to step down. "I'll just wash myself." If she wanted to wash her body in front of Xiao Xiao like this, no matter how much she feigned a calm composure, she might not be able to remain so. However, who knew that as soon as she moved, she would feel sore and weak all over, so she stopped immediately. Xiao Xiao looked at her in a calm and collected fashion, then smiling genially said, "I won't do anything." Zhang Ruan knew that at this moment, it would probably be difficult for her to wash up by herself, and it would be hypocritical and even coquettish for her to refuse. So she nodded and Xiao Xiao bent over and carried her over to the wooden barrel behind the screen. After their earlier physical intimacy, Zhang Ruan was already very tired, yet Xiao Xiao looked refreshed and full of vitality, carrying her effortlessly. Once he had settled her into the barrel, the soothing warm water was so comfortable that Zhang Ruan allowed herself to relax. Soon her eyes grew heavy and without knowing it, she gradually fell asleep, and by the time Xiao Xiao had taken great care to dry her body, Zhang Ruan was already sound asleep. With a smile, he once again carried her back to bed and gently tucked her in. Since it was their first time, he was concerned that Zhang Ruan had been overly exhausted and knew that he had to be more considerate towards her. And so when he saw how soundly she was sleeping, compassion arose and he felt a tad apologetic. Leaning over, he kissed her lightly on the forehead. Just then, Lian Qiao entered carrying a bowl of medicine, and he silently shook his head at her. She immediately understood and took her leave, smiling discreetly. On this night, it was unknown how many people in the Jinying Wangfu were aware of the charming scene, but more than likely only those guards hidden in the tree limbs, eaves and rafters knew. And in regards to the bet Jin Si had made, the final winner was the banker herself. Consequently, Jin Si very generously took the gambling money and treated everyone to eat and drink. When everyone was tipsy and merry, several hidden guards began to weep with joy. It was as if they were already seeing the next little master of the Jinying Wangfu already rushing forward to make his appearance at the Wangfu. When Zhang Ruan woke up, it was already the morning of the next day. Even after sleeping all night, her body still felt as if she had been run over by something, somehow aching more than the night before. The quilt around her was flat and Xiao Xiao was not on the bed. She propped herself to sit up when the door opened with a squeak, and Xiao Xiao came in with a bowl of medicine. Seeing that Zhang Ruan was awake, he put the medicine bowl on the small table on the side, and reached out to feel her forehead. He asked, "Is your body still hurting?" "Zhang Ruan." Xiao Xiao couldn't help laughing. These days he laughed frequently. His naturally handsome appearance combined with that laugh made him exude a charming presence like a peach blossom blooming in spring, and probably because he had eaten his fill the night before, he was in a cheerful mood. Zhang Ruan compared herself to him, stretched out her own hands to pick up the medicine bowl, blew on its contents, and drank the medicine down in a few gulps. Oh! Xiao Xiao had presumably instructed someone to find a physician to prescribe this medicine for her, as it seemed immediately effective. After taking it, she felt her body become warm and comfortable, and it even relieved much of the soreness. After she finished drinking, Xiao Xiao took the empty bowl from Zhang Ruan's hand and suggested, "You should just rest at home today." "No." Zhang Ruan shook her head. "Today, there is a hearing at the investigation department, so I need to make a trip there." After thinking about it, she added, "My body is much better after drinking the medicine. It will be alright for me to just listen to the case on trial. You don't have to worry." Xiao Xiao had always known that Zhang Ruan had her own opinion, and she had a good attitude when admitting when mistakes were made. Therefore, he was sure that she would not neglect herself again. It all came down to the word risk, and even though he loved her dearly and couldn't bear to see her suffer, he could not help relenting. "I will let Jean San and the others follow you. The people at the investigation department will certainly not make things difficult for you." His words implied that he had already exchanged hands with the official in charge of the case. Zhang Ruan looked at him and said, "Because I sued my own biological father, it is inevitable that people in the capital will have something to say. This will even hurt your reputation. I have placed Jining Wangfu in a compromising situation. Do you by any chance feel that I did something wrong?" "He is not your father," Xiao Xiao said lightly. "You have nothing to do with the Jiangfu now." Zhang Ruan was slightly taken aback, only to hear Xiao Xiao continue. "You married into the Jining Wangfu, which means you are now a part of my Xiao family. Whether it is revenge or overturning the case, the Xiao family will always have your back." His expression was resolute, yet his words were gentle. He was clearly the coldest person around, but his heart could always bring warmth and joy into her life. Zhang Ruan smiled. "Xiao Xiao, thank you." It was not a perfunctory thank you, nor was it a transactional gratitude between allies. This thanks of hers was truly from the depths of her heart. In life it was hard to come across someone who would stand behind you, no questions asked, wholly supporting you regardless of what you do, someone who would journey alongside you. This was love and devotion. "No need." Xiao Xiao smiled. "If you truly want to thank me, it would be nice if you were even more enthusiastic at night." Zhang Ruan. In a corner of the palace, Xian Pei listened to the information that Mingyu had returned to report. Then with a sneer he responded, "Zhang Quan's good life is probably coming to an end. Over the past few years, he has dared to scheme against her, and it is time for him to bear the consequences of his actions. Just because Xia Yan and the siblings Zhang Su and her brother are dead does not mean that all is right and well in this world. Does he truly think that he still has a sliver of a chance left at life? Ridiculous." Mingyu stood silently by the side. She knew that her young master had a special kind of relationship with Zhang Ruan, and it seemed that theirs was a unique one. But if Xiao Xiao couldn't find out the link between them, then naturally a hidden guard like her would not be able to discover anything either. Although she was puzzled, she knew that Xian Pei was protective of Zhang Ruan. Now Zhang Quan's deeds that as her father, he could be so merciless to his own daughter, had been spread throughout the capital. Even ordinary citizens rebuked him for being so cruel and unscrupulous, let alone Xian Pei, who was in a close relationship with Zhang Ruan. "Have you communicated clearly with the person at the investigation department?" Xian Pei played with the night pearl that was the size of a pigeon egg in his hand. It was the gift that the emperor rewarded him the day before because he was extremely impressed when he saw his excellent policy advice essay. Even in the palace, this night pearl was so rare that even Xianhua would be jealous if he saw it. Yet it was now something that Xian Pei played with like a meaningless toy. It truly spoke at length about Xian Pei's current status in the imperial court. The once useless, unfavored prince that anyone could bully was nowhere to be seen, and now no one would dare to despise nor hold him in contempt anymore. "Your Highness," Mingyu asked in puzzlement, "Xiao Wangye's people must have already spoken with the investigating officer. Even if your Highness does not act, the people from the investigation department will not allow Zhang Ruan to suffer any losses. Why should your Highness go to such lengths?" Xian Pei's every move was under the watchful eye of insidious people, and if someone discovered that he had meddled in the investigation department regarding Zhang Ruan's case, who knew what other rumors would begin to spread? In the palace, a wise man looked after his own hide, especially since Zhang Quan's case could be solved satisfactorily without his intervention. Mingzabation, a wise man looks after his own hide, to put one's own safety before matters of principle. What Xiao Xiao is doing is what he ought to be doing, and what this prince does is my business. Moreover, is there any need for me to obtain any benefits from him just to do what I wish? Xian Pei snorted coldly. The people from the investigation department have always been crafty. Jining Wang will have put pressure on them, and if this prince were to add additional pressure, they would realize that this is no small matter. As a result, they would leave no margin for error, and come down harder to prosecute Zhang Quan. In any case, as long as Zhang Quan receives a heavy sentence, this prince will be exceedingly pleased. Mingyu could only helplessly shrug. Xian Pei's hostility towards Xiao Xiao would never diminish. But as an adult in Mingyu's eyes, it seemed even a bit childish of him. For someone like Xian Pei, who always seemed mature, it was a behavior that rarely surfaced. In addition, she had always felt that there seemed to be some undertones of rivalry between Xiao Xiao and himself. Naturally, the pot of vinegar that they were vying for was over Zhang Ruan. However, Xianpei was still too young, and so Mingyu felt that this was just overthinking on her part. The entrance to the investigation department had long been surrounded by a crowd watching the excitement. The department had always been known for its fair hearings, and every time the trial concerned the private matters amongst the noble families of the capital, people would naturally want to join in the bustle and witness the exposé of the dirty secrets of the aristocracy. As such, unless they were truly being forced to their wits' ends, most people would not take their matters to the court. After all, a family's shame should never be spread about, and no one would actually want to expose their own family secrets and scandals out in public to become the talk of the town. When Zhang Ruan arrived, it naturally caused an uproar. It was the first time in Great Jin's history that someone had taken their biological father to court. Yet, it was once again Zhang Ruan who happened to do this. From her meteoric rise from being an unremarkable person in the Jiangfu to the Empress Dowager's favored Junju. And now, she was the Wangfei of that notorious rebel of the court. Every status of Zhang Ruan's could not help but make one sigh, and indeed, amongst those present were many jealous gazes. But even more were those of envy. What Jiang Quan did was naturally unpardonable, but what Zhang Ruan had done was basically severing ties with her own family, and the people were divided into two clear factions of separate and distinct opinions. Some insisted that Jiang Quan deserved death, that although Zhang Ruan's actions were outrageous, they were understandable. However, others believed that Zhang Ruan violated the social norms and customs that had been established since the founding of the Great Jin dynasty, and it was considered absolutely unfilial to take one's own father to court. Luckenburen, not recognizing one's family, self-centered and not making any allowances for the needs of one's relatives. Regardless of how others might perceive her, Zhang Ruan never cared. Stepping down from the carriage, she had adorned herself in an outfit with intricate pattern designs of composite flowers. Amongst them were certain patterns that were complex yet dignified, casting an aura of utmost nobility upon her person. As an overcoat, her outer attire consisted of a vibrant fox fur cloak with pleated silk satin folds, radiating a fiery and passionate hue like a warm burning fire. Despite the overnight snowfall blanketing the surroundings in a foot-high layer of glistening silvery white, with only her fluttering red resplendent outfit, she stood there as captivating and coolly poised. Her striking beauty almost compelled onlookers to hold their breath. Traditional Chinese patterns, ambolite, boxiangua, tradition, composite flowers. Although people from the investigation department had always treated all who came to the courtroom impartially, in front of Zhang Ruan, they could not help but show a little respect. This daughter of the Zhang family should not be underestimated. Their chief judge, Sun Tzu, had specially instructed his subordinates last night to be more polite to her. Even Sun Tzu, who had never been afraid of those in power and status, treated her with such importance. Therefore, one should not underestimate the powers that were behind this daughter of the Jiang family. In comparison, Jiang Quan's treatment was far worse. Sun Tzu was known for his eccentric temper in the imperial court, and it would seem that there was no one he feared. Even when facing his former colleagues, he was impartial and would not be deferential to anyone, and what Jiang Quan cared about most was his pride. Unfortunately, he had fallen short before Sun Tzu because now, it was as if he was a criminal being tried by him, and needless to say, his anger had long since been ignited. On this day Zhang Xianji was discussing military matters with the former general in the barracks, so he was truly unable to rush over. Zhang Ruan entered the main hall and found that Zhao Guang and the three brothers from the Zhao family were also present. When Zhao Yuanfeng saw her, he warmly greeted her. Arwan. After all, Zhao Mei was from the Zhao family. Although she said to sever ties with the family many years ago, and the Zhao family said that they didn't raise an unfilial daughter, the truth of the matter was, familial ties could never be truly severed. Especially since she was the pearl held in the palm of the Zhao family. Consequently, the Zhao family flew into a rage when they learned about the charges that Zhang Ruan had levied against Zhang Quan. If it wasn't for Zhang Xianji's help and persuasion, Zhao Guang would have long since rushed into the Jiangfu, beheaded Zhang Quan and buried him with Zhao Mei. The Zhao family had always protected their loved ones in spite of their shortcomings, and today's visit to the investigation department had undoubtedly expressed the Zhao family's attitude. Zhao Mei was the daughter of the Zhao family, and if Zhao Mei's death was not a coincidence, and even had something to do with Zhang Quan, then the Zhao family would definitely not take things lying down. Zhang Ruan went up to greet the Zhao family one by one, but none of the Zhao family's female family members or numerous grandchildren were present. Li Shi had already regretted what had happened to Zhao Mei, and if she learned the truth in court, her emotions would inevitably be depressed. Despite greeting the Zhao family, Zhang Ruan deliberately ignored Zhang Quan, and standing to the side, Zhang Quan felt the eyes of those around him pressing in. Feeling extremely indignant, he angrily cursed, "Unworthy descendants." Zhao Guang immediately glared and wanted to scold back, but who would have expected that Zhang Ruan would speak up before he did? She asked Zhang Quan, "I wonder who Minister Zhang is talking about." Zhang Quan did not expect that her first words would be without reservation and spare any niceties. Immediately he furiously roared, "To address your own father with an attitude like this, who knows where you learned your sense of propriety, justice, integrity, and honor? I'm afraid that Minister Zhang may have forgotten." Zhang Ruan smiled. "Yesterday, I cleared that debt of having any blood relations with you. I no longer have anything to do with the Jiang Fu. Where did father come from?" Zhang Quan was at a loss for words. Everyone recalled how Zhang Ruan decisively cut the back of her own hand with a dagger in the snow the day before, and Zhang Quan's old face flushed red. On that normally elegant and dignified face, an ugly contorted look appeared. "Silence!" The judicial aide, who started the court proceedings, sang in a long voice as the guards on both sides stood silently. Dressed in court robes, the chief judge, Sun Su, walked in with long strides, and he sat down on the highest seat in the center. Sweeping his gaze down, he handed the petition letter to the judicial aide at the side. The aide took the petition letter, cleared his throat, and loudly began to read the contents of the indictment. The content of the charges claimed that Xia Yan and the Xia family plotted to murder Zhao Mei and her son and daughter. This included the ambush against Zhang Exanji in the woods, and the vicious methods used on them when they were young, all of which made people's blood turn cold as they listened. Furthermore, everyone was flabbergasted at Zhang Quan's indifferent and callous attitude while all of this happened. In most large, noble families like this, fighting and scheming within were not unheard of. However, what was uncommon was the status of Zhang Ruan and Zhang Exanji as daughter and son of the Jiang Fu. As Zhang Quan's own flesh and blood, he had actually not been the least bit concerned and even had an apathetic attitude towards Xia Yan's schemes. The judicial aide was only human, and this petition letter was truly written in a way that filled one with resentment. He even had to choke back his emotions as he read aloud what was written. The petition truly made the men in the crowd roll up their sleeves, fervently wishing to beat Zhang Quan up themselves this instant, whilst the women dabbed their eyes with handkerchiefs in a desperate attempt to wipe their tears away. Although Zhao Guang and the three brothers of the Zhao family had long known that Zhao Mei's life in the Jiang Fu was not well off, as each line in the petition letter was read aloud, they could not help but feel their hearts being clawed. No one in the world understood more than Zhang Ruan how painful and perilous their lives were in the Jiang Fu, as they faced dangers from all four fronts. Due to her earnest prose, the more the Zhao family listened, the angrier they became, until their eyes were bulging in anger. They hated that they could not instantly rush forth to kill Zhang Quan. Zhang Quan frowned. Now no one present looked at him with the slightest bit of kindness, so he became the target of public criticism. He didn't know since when Zhang Ruan had gained such influence, but at the same time he was very clear about Sun Su's temperament since they had been colleagues for many years. Yet, when facing Zhang Ruan, he was deferential and humble. To think that Zhang Ruan had such capabilities? By now, all his well-thought-out plans were replaced by uneasiness, and Zhang Quan's expression lost its earlier confidence and self-righteousness. Whilst all the charges and facts in the petition letter were, up until now, circumstantial, once the reading got towards the ending, the focus took a turn. The subject moved on to the matter of Zhao Mei's poisoning. The petition letter clearly stated that Xia Yan was responsible for the poison and Zhang Quan was complicit because even though he knew about the matter, he simply stood by without intervening and even went so far as to support and encourage it. After the petition letter was completely read, Zhang Quan couldn't help but stand up angrily and declare, Utter nonsense. What a whole lot of nonsense. What poisoning? I didn't let anyone poison her at all. Zhao Mei died of illness. How dare you use such a mouthful of slander to smear me? Whilst he hated Zhang Ruan, he hated Zhao Mei, who had long since passed on even more. He felt that Zhao Mei was the root cause of this whole debacle. All of a sudden Zhao Guang stood up from his seat and roared, "Zhang Quan, do you think I dare not take your life right now?" With his hardy body tempered through the battleground, he could already scare a child into tears at a glance on any given day. But in this split second, he was really furious. The bloodthirsty, imposing manner of his emanating forth, and Zhang Quan trembled. Anything else that he had wanted to say was suddenly swallowed back. A trace of disdain flashed in Zhao Yuanping's eyes, and he continued with a light smile, "Minister Zhang, why are you so anxious? You haven't been convicted yet, maybe things will turn around. If you really want to voice out any grievances, you might as well wait until the end to speak up." There was a faint chill in these words which made one tremble in the depths of their heart. Zhang Quan still wanted to speak, but he heard Zhang Ruan's smiling voice. "That's not all, I have evidence. So, Minister Zhang, how about we request for Sundaron to have a look at the evidence before you speak any further?" Zhang Quan was surprised because he didn't expect Zhang Ruan to actually have evidence. After all, so many years had passed, and he thought that Zhang Ruan would not be able to make any big waves even if she managed to rummage through the old affairs. Therefore, what would the final result of an old case be without evidence? But as soon as Zhang Ruan talked about the evidence, he couldn't help but feel a little guilty, and yet he still stubbornly insisted. "What are you making up?" Sun Tzu slapped the wooden gavel and shouted, "Bring in the witness." The subordinates quickly brought in the so-called witness. She was a thin young woman, and she could even be called delicate and pretty if one looked carefully. Yet for some unknown reason, she seemed somewhat wan and sallow. Perhaps due to her arduous life, her appearance looked much older. When Zhang Quan saw her, he sneered and mocked, "I don't know this person. If this is the so-called witness, then you ought to have invited someone from the Jiang Fu." The woman raised her head when she heard the words and said in a hoarse voice, "It has been a long time and master doesn't recognize this servant, but this servant still recognizes master." Zhang Quan was startled and looked at the woman carefully for a long time before he asked in surprise, "You are Hu Dai?" Hu Dai smiled lightly. "It's rare that master still remembers me. Why are you here?" Zhang Quan pointed at her with a trembling hand. In the past, he heard about how Jiang Su had banished Hu Dai out of the Fu for the reason that as a maidservant she had not done her tasks seriously. She had failed to recognize that the placenta she bought at the medical shop was the miscarried fetus from their Fu. This in turn had ruined Jiang Su's reputation and traumatized her. Accordingly, it would not have been an exaggeration to have such a maid beaten to death. Only Jiang Su had already sold her, and Zhang Quan had assumed that such a maid would have died long ago. So he didn't understand how she suddenly appeared here. Hu Dai smiled, but that smile was a bit weird, and a trace of hatred flashed across her eyes when she looked at Zhang Quan. This servant came here due to one's self-conscience and condemnation. So it is natural that this servant personally stepped forward to serve as a witness to testify for the innocent eldest young master and eldest Mississippi. Nonsense. Zhang Quan's face turned blue when he heard the words. "What are you talking about?" He turned his head to look at Zhang Ruan, who was smiling slightly, and suddenly realized. "What benefits did she give you, for you to slander me in such a manner? Hu Dai, do you know how serious the crime is for slandering a court official?" Zhang Quan seemed to have lost his mind, and the people in the hall were watching intently, including the chief judge, Sun Tzu. The more Zhang Quan was flustered and became undone, the more obvious the disgraceful situation he was in. Sun Tzu had already been bribed by someone beforehand, and seeing that Zhang Ruan and the Zhao family were happy, naturally he would not obstruct it. Facing Zhang Quan's frantic questioning, Hu Dai shook her head and said, "Eldest Miss didn't give me any favors. Master ought to be most aware of what it is that he has done, so why bother to feign innocence? There will always be unexplainable situations beyond man's control in this world that are said to be left up to destiny. Heaven is watching what people are doing, and when doing things one ought to think about the day when the truth will come to light." "Why are you going to such lengths to cause me trouble?" Jiang Quan said angrily. Hu Dai lowered her head as if to turn a deaf ear. Jiang Ruan, who was sitting to the side, smiled slightly. Hu Dai would of course come out to testify for her, not only because of her promise, but the truth of the matter was Hu Dai deeply hated the Jiang family. Because Jiang Susu had sent Hu Dai to be sold off because of the placenta mishap, one could say that this was Jiang Susu's own comeuppance. After all, this was a maidservant who had been with her since she was a child, but she had even gone to the extent of directly selling her off to a 9th-grade brothel. What kind of place is that sort of brothel? For a young woman to enter there was like throwing them into a living hell. One could only imagine what sort of days Hu Dai had gone through. But after Jiang Susu had sold her off, Jiang Ruan preemptively bought off the brothel owner and secretly kept track of her movements. So while she did not let her die, she did not let her get off too easily either. After all, Hu Dai had been by Jiang Susu's side for many years, and what Xia Yan and Jiang Susu had done, she would have some degree of knowledge of. Fully aware that she had such an exceptional chess piece in her pocket, Jiang Ruan finally found a day to put it to use. For example, at this moment, the appearance of this chess piece had already caused Jiang Quan to lose more than half of the battle. She had appeared in front of Hu Dai and promised to save her from her life's miseries as long as Hu Dai was willing to testify. Perhaps when Hu Dai was first sold, she would not have agreed to this condition. As Xia Yan was a shrewd person, she had chosen an extremely loyal maidservant for Jiang Susu. But after such a long time, Hu Dai, who had long been tormented without a rest, could barely sustain her own life, so how could she care about loyalty? After all these years, what remained was the deep hatred she had towards the Jiang family. If it wasn't for Xia Yan and Jiang Susu, if it wasn't for Jiang Quan, how could she have been sold to such a lowly place? Time was truly a wondrous thing. Hate could turn into love, love could also turn into hate. So once Jiang Ruan had set her conditions before Hu Dai, and without saying a word, she had agreed. Chapter 202. Chapter 202. To find oneself completely isolated. Minister Jiang, Sun Tzu said with a straight face, the court is not a place for you to mess around at will. We hear from the witness first. Before Jiang Quan could speak any further, Hu Dai kowtowed to Sun Tzu and said, replying to Darren, this servant is here to disclose the crimes that were committed by Furen Xia Yan. Her head was lowered, but her voice was clear and loud, just enough to reach the ears of the populace outside who were watching the excitement. At that time, when the previous Furen Zhao Mei was still alive, my family's Furen was still just a Yinyang. Although Master dearly loved her and young Miss, the position of the matriarch was still held by the previous Furen Zhao Mei. My family's Furen had always been proud and arrogant, and coming from a noble aristocratic family, she was naturally not willing to be inferior to others. Although daily necessities like food were not too bad, and sometimes her status was even higher than that of Furen, she was still dissatisfied. Although Hu Dai's words seemed to be just stating the facts, once it fell upon others' ears, it felt entirely different. No one was unaware of how Xia Chong had gotten his marquis title in the first place. If it wasn't for his brother's early death, as one who was born as a Shu son, the title would never have fallen on him. Moreover, the title had only been obtained after Xia Yan entered the Jiangfu. Before that, she was just the daughter of a minor official Shu son. How could she have regarded herself as part of a noble official family? To think that she had the cheek to say that about herself, because if she were truly a noblewoman from an aristocratic line of officials, why would Jiang Quan have married Zhao Mei first instead of Xia Yan? For a daughter that came from a Shu son to be this vain, when according to Hu Dai's words Xia Yan's status in the Jiangfu was even higher than that of Zhao Mei. If this wasn't neglecting the wife to favor the concubine, what else could this be? Everyone had heard of the rumors that Jiang Quan only favored Xia Yan, but they had assumed that this had happened only after Zhao Mei's death. However, to find out that Jiang Quan had done such ridiculous things not too long after Zhao Mei married into the Jiangfu, didn't this truly show how he couldn't bear to be parted from her Zhao Mei family's power? And yet, when he found out that the relationship would not bring any benefits to his official career, he revealed his true colors. Hu Dai continued later, Furen thought about it. As an official of the court, Master could not divorce his wife without rhyme or reason, so she would have to live under another's thumb for the rest of her life. And, as she was unwilling, she decided to poison the previous Furen. Back then, foreign used a lot of money to buy poison from a foreign country and have it mixed into the previous foreign's daily meals. She was poisoned bit by bit, until eventually enough poison accumulated in her body, and one day she breathed her last. And Master knew about all of this. One time, foreign's poison was discovered by Master, but Master simply reminded foreign to be careful, and to not leave any traces behind that could be used against her. After she finished speaking, Hu Dai kowtowed twice to Sun Tzu and said, "Darren, everything that this servant has spoken of is entirely true. I wouldn't dare to speak one false word. It's nonsense. It's all nonsense." Jiang Quan pointed at Hu Dai and cursed angrily. "Who gave you the courage to speak nonsense here, to disturb people's hearts? Hu Dai, don't forget who you are. You are a servant of my Jiang family." Hu Dai shook her head. Master has probably forgotten. Hu Dai's deed of slavery is no longer there, and Hu Dai is no longer a member of the Jiang Fu. As she spoke, although she tried her best to suppress her feelings, there was still a trace of hatred shown in her eyes. Jiang Quan was at a loss for words, and Sun Tzu slapped the wooden gavel again. "Silence!" Hu Dai knelt on the ground and spoke again, responding to Darren, "This servant has physical evidence to share." Jiang Quan was taken aback, and Sun Tzu asked in a deep voice, "Where is the evidence?" Hu Dai glanced at Zhang Ruan, who was sitting peacefully on a seat at the side. The smile at the curl of her lips seemed to be unshaken since the very beginning. Hu Dai's heart settled calmly as she continued with an honest tone. "It is in the residence where Foreign lived. At that time, the poison was so rare and precious because of its origins, and since Foreign didn't know when the previous Foreign would become terminally ill, she ordered me to keep it as she had thought that the poison might still be useful in the future. So this servant buried it under a tree in Foreign's yard. There, the prescription remained, but later Master said it was still useful, so he kept it for himself in a box in the study. However, the Master probably forgot about the box. Sometime later, Foreign asked this servant to clean up the study, and this servant placed the box into a wooden chest. That wooden chest had not been touched for many years because it only contained numerous old things." Zhao Guang cupped his hands at Sun Tzu and nodded his head towards him, and the tone in his words was already unquestionable. "Son Darren, since all the evidence has been presented, wouldn't it be prudent to send someone to search for it?" "Naturally," Sun Tzu replied with a stern expression. "This official has already ordered the officers to search Minister Zhang's Fu." Jiang Quan sneered, "Truly ridiculous. You think you can convict me with a few words of nonsense? Hu Dai, I think you are not afraid of death." Smug with a well-thought-out plan in mind, he was confident that the officers would be unable to find anything in the Jiang Fu. Moreover, he had never directly intervened when Xia Yan was poisoning Zhao Mei, and Xia Yan would not have been so stupid as to leave any evidence. She was careful and considerate in doing things, always making sure to clean up all loose ends so that no information could be used against them. Although he didn't know what benefit Hu Dai had received from Zhang Ruan to falsify evidence like this, Jiang Quan firmly believed that not just anyone could enter the Jiang Fu. His study room, being the most important place of them all, was personally checked by him several times a day. What wooden chest, what box, he had never even heard of these before. Hu Dai probably only cared about lying, but she couldn't produce any real evidence. If you couldn't produce it, then no verdict could be made, so what would happen to Hu Dai? Upon thinking of this, he glanced at Zhang Ruan's expression and saw her sitting upright. She seemed to notice his gaze and turned her head to smile at him. Zhang Ruan's smile was even more calm than Jiang Quan's, and there seemed to be some subtle ridicule hidden within it. That gaze immediately woke up Jiang Quan's heart, and he couldn't help but feel a little scared. It's not that Jiang Quan didn't know how evil his daughter was. For so many years, whether it was the Xia family or him, none of them have been able to extract any benefit from her. The Jiang Fu was an impenetrable fortress, and yet they could not keep her from coming up with some unforeseen ways to harm them. In the next moment, the officers in charge of the search returned, and the leader of the officers strode into the courtroom with a report. He leaned over and whispered a few words to Sun Tzu, and Sun Tzu glanced at Jiang Quan while listening. Jiang Quan's heart thumped. Before he could figure it out, Sun Tzu slapped the wooden gavel and shouted, "How bold of you, Jiang Quan! As an official of the imperial court, you don't manage your family strictly, let your concubine harm others, and even colluded with her to murder your wife. How should you be punished? The officers have found evidence from the box in the wooden chest in your residence. What else do you have to say? After finishing speaking, the official beside him presented an iron box, which everyone could clearly see. A thin piece of paper floated out of the box that Sun Tzu opened in his hand, and it was impossible to fake it under the watchful eyes of everyone. Zhao Yuanping got up and walked towards Sun Tzu. He took it in his hands to read. After reading it at a glance, Zhao Yuanping returned the paper to Sun Tzu, and when he looked at Jiang Quan again, his smile was completely indifferent. Minister Jiang is really good at scheming. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, this nobleman wouldn't have known that there could be such a cruel and unscrupulous person in the world. Zhao Yuanping was usually subtle when he rebuked others with mean sarcasm, and Jiang Quan's face turned livid after he heard his words. But what was happening was unbelievable. He came and stood on trial today, but before he left, he had checked the study carefully. He had not seen any wooden chest or box, so how could one suddenly appear? What exactly was going on here? He cried out about this injustice. I definitely did not do this. Sun Tzu, as an official in charge of the case, the investigation should check all loose ends thoroughly. To dare convict me of crime with merely a small prescription? Isn't it obvious that someone is deliberately framing me? How can you not be aware of this? This official has always only looked at the evidence, Sun Tzu said unhurriedly. It was not that he did not understand the underlying threat in Jiang Quan's words, but what kind of case was this? This was Xiao Xiao's wife, the current Jining Wangfei, and the former Hong'an Junju who had personally filed a petition. No one in the imperial court of the capital was unaware of the kind of power that the Jining Wangfu, which supported her, had. Xiao Xiao had even personally given him his greetings, thus how could he dare to neglect this? Moreover, the murdered woman in this case was still the apple of the eye of the General Fu. If he was unable to give them a proper explanation, given the nature of Zhao Guang's family's protectiveness, he feared that they might tear him apart. Not to mention that person in the palace had also given his regards as well. Although the investigation department specialized in cases that ordinary people dare not handle, even if high officials in the capital were involved, Sun Tzu was fearless because he relied on the emperor to support his official career. So he need not fear anyone's displeasure. However, if it was someone the emperor trusted, there would be no fish when the water was clear. Sun Tzu knew this truth very well. After so many years of convicting many high officials, while still holding strong to his position without fail, Sun Tzu was extremely astute at managing such relations. Now that Xian Pei's status in the palace was rising steadily, the emperor looked favorably on him. Whilst the 5th prince and 8th prince were only fighting openly and maneuvering covertly, no one could be certain who the throne would fall to. Maybe, the future heir apparent of Great Jin would be the budding genius 13th prince. Xian Pei had especially asked someone to send his regards. Although he was unsure of the reason, Sun Tzu felt a lot of pressure. It was precisely because they had been colleagues for so many years that Sun Tzu could see clearly that it would be very difficult for Jiang Quan to be given benevolence now, because everyone that he had offended, each one of them had the ability to put him to death. Zhao Yuanfeng said leisurely, Minister Jiang, the Jiangfu is your residence, so naturally only your people can enter it. You don't even know when the box was put in, so you can't ask us outsiders for the answer you are looking for. Ever since the Fu was established, I am aware that apart from my Mimi, the Zhao family has never set foot inside your Jiangfu. What Zhao Yuanfeng said was not without irony. At first Zhao Mei broke off contact with the Zhao family, but after Zhao Mei's death, the Jiang family also banned all relations and contact with the General Fu. They even secretly regarded the General Fu as an enemy. Consequently, since the Zhao and Jiang families had never dealt with each other, it wasn't worth mentioning that this Zhao family had never entered their Fu. Jiang Quan had hit a snag but had no intention of arguing with Zhao Yuanfeng. It seemed that he had finally understood the magnitude of these affairs. With all the witnesses and material evidence, and after looking at Sun Tzu's attitude, it was looking very difficult for him to escape any conviction. By now Jiang Quan, who had always been confident, was somewhat in a panic. He was desperately thinking about how the box had appeared in the study, and his eyes swept around the crowd without focusing, before he suddenly froze. A familiar figure was mixed in the crowd. It was a young and beautiful woman, and Jiang Quan was taken aback momentarily before a few thoughts flashed through his mind. He immediately called out, "Xiaoyu, you despicable woman, you have actually hurt me." The figure of the woman in the crowd was Xiaoyu, the current foreign of the Jiangfu. Initially she had lowered her head to avoid Jiang Quan's gaze after meeting his eyes, but upon hearing Jiang Quan shouting so loudly, she couldn't help but feel a little annoyed. Immediately becoming overwhelmed, she blushed and remained silent. Jiang Quan seemed to have figured it out in an instant, and without caring where he was, he cursed loudly, "It's her. It was this conniving woman who colluded with outsiders to harm me. She is the only one who can enter my study. Only she could sneak something into it in the shortest amount of time without anyone noticing. Xiaoyu, I have treated you well, but you are so vicious to harm your own husband. You poisonous woman." Xiaoyu was in the crowd, and everyone turned their attention to her. She endured it, then suddenly shed 2 trails of tears. "Laoi, since Yuer has become your wife, have I done something wrong for you to treat me like this? To even pin such a crime onto Yuer? How could Yuer frame Laoi? If anything happened to Laoi, how can Yuer, a helpless woman, survive? Yuer knows that Laoi and Yan Jiejie had feelings for each other like the depths of the ocean, but Yuer has not been favored by Laoi since she passed the door. But Laoi, Yuer is also your wife, how can you treat Yuer like this?" She naturally looked thin and timid, and these words of hers revealed an extremely sad disposition. Showing a heartbroken attitude, she knelt down and kowtowed a few times towards the gate of the courtroom. "Forget it, Laoi, since you and I are husband and wife, if Yuer can save Laoi, Yuer would be willing to use her life to do so. It is true, the box and wooden chest were placed inside by Yuer." When she said this, she burst into tears, almost fainting from crying. People would always sympathize with the weak, and if the weak was a beautiful woman, their sympathy would be doubled. The more Xiaoyu spoke, the more everyone suspected that Jiang Quan had even framed his new wife. He was really a selfish man. Xiaoyu's words were reasonable. Indeed, now that the Xia family was gone, why would she frame Jiang Quan? Because if the Jiang family fell, she would become a widow, and how hard it would be for her to live. As for what Xiaoyu said about Jiang Quan, still deeply reminiscing about Xia Yan, the audience sneered. They feared that only a man like Jiang Quan would still deeply long for an unfaithful woman who made him wear a green hat. Truly, whatever pot there was would only fit that lid it needed. Jiang Ruan watched Xiaoyu's performance with a smile, only finding it interesting. The women of the Xia family seemed to be born with an acting talent, especially when it came to making people cry and sympathize with them. What Jiang Quan succumbed to the most back then was Xia Yan's little tricks like this. But now that Xia Yan had changed to Xiaoyu, who knew if Jiang Quan could still tolerate it? Only with true experience would one be able to tell the greatness of a woman's lies and tears. Now Jiang Quan probably hated the Xia family too. Xiaoyu was a smart person. Now that the Xia family had collapsed, her being a pawn to maintain the relationship between the Xia and Jiang families was completely useless. Xiaoyu was also aware that with Jiang Quan's ambition, as a useless person, one day she too would be kicked like a stumbling rock to the curb. Besides, she was now the foreign of the Jiang family, and she knew exactly what state the Jiang family was in. A mansion with an empty shell would collapse sooner or later. Whilst Jiang Quan treated her rather neutrally, Xiaoyu was still young. How could she be reconciled with such treatment? The women of the Xia family had always been ambitious, and even if Xiaoyu was a distant cousin, she was not willing to be buried like this for the rest of her life. Jiang Ruan had offered her a deal, and so without any hesitation, Xiaoyu betrayed Jiang Quan for her own future. Jiang Quan was really going crazy with anger, and the eyes of the people around him were full of suspicion. He wanted to find someone who could help him speak up, but in the end he found that no one was willing to. None of his wives, his children, his colleagues, or even his allies were by his side now. He suddenly realized that he had become the one who was abandoned. He had become a useless, abandoned person. "Is this what you want?" Jiang Quan stared heavily at Jiang Ruan, and suddenly laughed miserably. "You have made everyone betray me. What a good daughter I raised, ha ha ha. I didn't know that I raised such a good daughter." Too many unrighteous deeds will only lead to death. Zhang Ruan lightly replied, Minister Zhang, the heavens are watching, so don't think you can get away with anything. When you did all of this to my mother back then, you should have considered this ending. Yes, she wanted Zhang Quan to taste the fate of being betrayed. In her previous life, her father had strategized and turned all those who were not valued by him into pawns in his hands, stepping stones for the Zhang family, as he paved the way step by step for Zhang Susu's position as the empress. Every step of the glory of the Zhang family was forged by the sacrifice and blood of the three of them, her mother, brother, and herself. Now Zhang Quan should also have a taste of this. This kind of struggling with nowhere to go, lonely and hopeless, and a sudden awareness that you have been betrayed by everyone. Furthermore, the ironic realization that one has become truly useless. He liked to play chess, right? That was fine too. In this life, she would just change the person in charge of the chessboard. She would write the stratagem for this round and he would be the final move and the final useless piece in the game. He was nothing but a useless pawn. Zhang Quan suddenly shut up and he looked straight at Zhang Ruan. Zhang Ruan's undisguised hatred and crazed eyes met his, and he suddenly felt a burst of fear. He didn't know where Zhang Ruan's hatred came from, or how a person could show such a terrifying expression, like a man-eating beast. Zhang Quan, do you plead guilty? Seeing that the chaos was almost over, Sun Tzu slapped the wooden gavel and shouted. Zhang Quan turned around dully, looked at Sun Tzu on the pedestal and slowly laughed. He stood there and said with some disdain, Sun Tzu, why are you pretending to be noble? Everyone is an official in the same dynasty, and none of us are innocent. Today you treat me like this because I admit that my strength is inferior to others. I have nothing to say. I also admit to this crime. But I hope you remember that I just succumbed to authority. Today, if I could have been powerful enough to withstand this, I would have fought to the very end. When Zhang Ruan heard what he said, the corners of her eyes slowly bent downward, and she smiled slightly. As expected of Zhang Quan, who had been an official for many years, he could see the significant points at a glance. In today's matter, in fact, the witness testimony was not that important, and the physical evidence was not important as well. It all merely depended on how the case was tried. And Sun Tzu's attitude was the most important thing. Zhang Quan had probably thought that Sun Tzu would not dare to go too far for the sake of them being colleagues. But Sun Tzu's attitude could only explain one thing: someone was doing something to support Zhang Ruan. No matter who that person was, someone who could make Sun Tzu bow down for him must have a strong background. When Zhang Quan pleaded guilty, he even kept a hand to himself. He pretended to be so generous in pleading guilty, but those last few sentences of his would make others wonder and speculate about other things. Even if he pleaded guilty, he would take advantage of the opportunity to pour a basin of dirty water on Zhang Ruan and Sun Tzu, which was really sinister of him. Was Zhang Quan the only one capable of doing such a thing? Zhang Ruan smiled slightly. Zhang Quan never wasted time on useless things. Now that he had confessed his sins, what effect can such innocuous splashing of dirty water everywhere have? This kind of behavior seemed to be one of an incompetent person who was finally grabbing and biting randomly. In Zhang Ruan's eyes, she could only find it ridiculous. She slowly stood up and walked to Zhang Quan. Everyone looked at the pair silently. Zhang Ruan walked up to Zhang Quan, and Zhang Quan glared at her tightly. There was anger and resentment in his eyes, and even a trace of fear, but there was really no trace of warmth in his eyes. Zhang Ruan had long since been used to this. She stopped in front of Zhang Quan, sighed suddenly with a soft voice and said, "It turns out that Minister Zhang, who has always had great ambitions, will have a moment where he succumbs to power." She said it with a sigh, but it was like a slamming punch hitting Zhang Quan's heart. What appeared vaguely in front of his eyes was actually memories when he was proud to have been newly ordained as a noble of the imperial court. Even though his ambition was greater than the sky, his fortune was thinner than paper. He had always wanted to pretend to be like a clean stream and unworldly, but now he had taken the initiative to admit that he had fallen under the footsteps of power. This was a fatal blow to him and an intolerable shame. And this shame had come from this daughter of his who he had only treated like dirt. The more glamorous Zhang Ruan seemed, the more Zhang Quan felt the humbleness of his current status. He had always been a cowardly and hypocritical person from the bottom of his heart, and he had always valued the way others look at him, so it took him many years to build a clean and honest appearance. Now that this layer of skin had been torn off, Jiang Quan couldn't bear it anymore. He felt that he couldn't breathe and passed out straight away. Two officials quickly carried Jiang Quan away as Sun Tzu slapped the wooden gavel and shouted, "Minister Jiang Quan has pleaded guilty in court. He conspired with his concubine, Xiashi, to murder his wife and harm his children. These are heinous crimes. The evidence of the crime is clear. Everyone, even though families have their own values, the empire has laws. According to the law, if anyone commits any kind of vicious act, they will be thrown into prison and stand before the court the next day." The crowd watching the excitement from outside suddenly chattered raucously as Zhao Guang clenched his fists tightly. He had restrained himself very well today. Now, after hearing Jiang Quan had pleaded guilty whilst he was certain that he would not be able to escape his crime, Zhao Guang still couldn't stop from going out of control. Zhao Yuanjia comforted him whilst Zhao Yuanping and Zhao Yuanfeng looked at each other with heavy eyes. Zhang Ruan stood there indifferently, watching Jiang Quan being dragged away, and slowly lowered her eyes. Is this the end? Of course not. Chapter 205. Chapter 205. The first to make a move is the first to meet misfortune. In the dead of the night, the dew was heavy and the sky was cloaked in darkness. However, a corner of the palace was brightly lit. A bedroom was ornately decorated with lavish furnishing, and a woman sat alone in front of a vanity mirror, combing her long black hair in an agitated manner. Jiang Dan subconsciously looked into the mirror. The woman reflected back at her was now at a prime age. But after washing her face at night, once the many and various cosmetics and gorgeous accessories were stripped away, her naturally pretty face revealed a pale pallor and vulnerability. She slowly stretched out her nail-polished hand to caress her face. At her age, how much longer could she still remain beautiful? If she couldn't grab everything while she was still young and attractive, how could she be reconciled? She pondered over the news that Zhuer had brought back today. Jiang Quan was tightly guarded in the imperial prison, and the people that she'd sent had no chance to strike at all. Obviously the other party had come prepared. The more this happened, the more uneasy Jiang Dan felt. Every day that Jiang Quan remained alive was a potential threat to her. Moreover, based on her understanding of Jiang Ruan, she was well aware that Jiang Ruan would never let her off so easily, and keeping Jiang Quan alive was essentially holding her ransom. If there was no way to get rid of Jiang Quan, then what should she do? Jiang Dan sighed, and her eyes fell on the dancing flames of the candle in front of her. A letter that had been recently burned no longer bore any traces of its original appearance, as it had long been reduced to a pile of ashes. However, its contents were deeply etched into her memory. Previously she had arranged to have a message delivered to Xianli in an attempt to probe and suss out if he had any intention of getting rid of Jining Wang, Xiao Xiao, and Zhang Ruan. She believed that Xianli would not regard a woman like Zhang Ruan as an opponent, let alone spend a lot of effort to deal with her. Therefore, the only option was to use Xiao Xiao as an alternative. Jiang Dan resided in the palace, and she had a good grasp of the current situation within the imperial court. Xianli coveted the throne and Xiao Xiao was a stumbling block in his plans. Presently, there was no direct confrontation within the imperial court as the situation was at an impasse regarding the rivalry for the throne, but there would come a day when Xianli would no longer tolerate this thorn in his side. No emperor liked courtiers who were stronger than him. Jiang Dan had originally thought that Xianli would be more than happy to deal with Xiao Xiao. Furthermore, as long as Xiao Xiao was dealt with, naturally Zhang Ruan would be implicated. And if the matter was pertaining to national affairs, even Empress Dowager Ida would not be able to save her. But Xianli's reply was concise and clear. He had succinctly rejected Jiang Dan's proposal, and he would not take action against Xiao Xiao. Jiang Dan was puzzled and annoyed, but there was nothing she could do. In this deal with Xianli, she had always been passive because she did not have enough bargaining power to be on an equal footing with him. Xianli dealt with matters meticulously and cautiously. Even in their dealings, there wasn't anything significant in their correspondence that was readily identifiable, there was no seal, and the handwriting was always completely different. Hence, there was absolutely nothing that could be used as leverage. Time was running out. Before Jiang Quan's sentence was pronounced, Zhang Ruan would definitely take action against her. Jiang Dan looked again at the woman in the mirror. All of this was what she had worked so hard to achieve. She had swallowed her anger and suffered in silence while in the Jiangfu, keeping a low profile while fawning over others, just to be able to stand out one day. Jiang Li, who was like her, a Shu daughter, died, and even Jiang Su, a Di daughter, was nothing more than a fleeting vapor. She, on the other hand, had risen to stand at such a height with great difficulty. Thus how could she let everything that she had accomplished disappear completely before her eyes? She slowly stretched out her index finger, and her blood-red nails scratched across the bronze mirror, causing a sharp scraping sound. Her eyes slowly showed a glint of sinister ruthlessness as she thought, no matter what, the only solution was to eliminate the root cause. In the early morning of the second day, in the imperial garden of the palace, Lu Min and Xian Pei were walking and talking as they made their way towards Nanhua Yuan. Earlier in the imperial study, the emperor had inspected and tested Xian Pei's homework. In recent days, the emperor appeared to be in a bad mood, so much so that even the favorite consort in the harem didn't dare to offend him. Lu Min knew that this matter might have something to do with Jiang Ruan. The entire Great Jin was already well aware of the commotion Jiang Ruan had caused by suing her biological father. Some people said that she had violated the laws of filial piety, while others said that her actions were justifiable. In Lu Min's heart, Jiang Ruan had her own reasons. Moreover, what Jiang Quan did was indeed worse than a beast. It would be better to be fatherless than to have such a father. When the emperor was in a bad mood, it would seem that only Xian Pei could cheer him up. Thinking of this, Lu Min glanced at Xian Pei in amazement. This child was so young, yet he seemed to be able to firmly grasp the hearts of people. It is said that the Sacred Heart is infinite and immeasurable, and it is always difficult to comprehend the ordinary heart. And in Lu Min's eyes, Xian Pei clearly had a profound insight into the heart of the emperor. All the emperor had to do was glare, and instantly he knew what to say to ease the situation. He was already intelligent and astute, and adding to this was his ability to say the right words to soothe and neutralize situations. Thus it had become apparent that the emperor was growing more and more attached to Xian Pei. There was a group of old veterans in the imperial court who had at first insisted on staying neutral in the fight for the throne, but now they were gradually starting to think about whether they should side with Xian Pei. Sensing Lu Min's gaze, Xian Pei raised his head to look at him, and asked with a half-smile, "What is Imperial Grand Tutor Lu thinking?" Lu Min suddenly came to his senses. Even though he was called Imperial Grand Tutor, he no longer taught the Crown Prince, but instead found himself tutoring this 13th Highness all day long. Although the Empress had made some veiled criticisms, she was also at her wits' end as she was aware that the Crown Prince was not scholar material. Furthermore, Lu Min felt that it was much easier to teach Xian Pei. Even in regards to understanding and analyzing the current affairs of state and the workings of the imperial court, Xian Pei clearly had a much better perception and intuition compared to him, his tutor. When a prince looked at a situation, most often they would view it from the top down, and so it was challenging and difficult to lower themselves to have an understanding of the common people. Xian Pei, on the other hand, did just the opposite. He was capable of looking at situations from the bottom up, and he could see the shortcomings and deficiencies of many people as well as those in low positions. A lot of the time, his display of his outstanding acumen and capabilities were totally unlike the ability of such a young child. "I'm thinking, Your Highness answered very well in front of His Majesty today, and your homework has probably improved again." Lu Min smiled. "Imperial Grand Tutor Lu, do you know what will happen if you lie to this prince?" Xian Pei raised his eyebrows. It's a bit surprising that Imperial Grand Tutor Lu is not forthcoming. Lu Min was startled. He always felt that Xian Pei had an uncanny ability to grasp a person's heart, and this particular trait was somewhat similar to Jiang Ruan. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly saw a woman in fine clothes, with an entourage of palace maids trailing behind her coming towards them from afar. Xian Pei followed his gaze and frowned unconsciously, as if disgusted, but it was merely a blink of an eye before he showed a harmless smile. The woman also saw the two of them, and after a pause she continued towards them. When she reached the two of them, she too smiled and bowed. 13th Highness, Imperial Grand Tutor Lu. Noble Consort Jiang. Xian Pei smiled and just nodded. As a prince, He didn't have to salute Jiang Dan, whose status was beneath him. It's just that being overtly understanding of others might not always be such a good thing. Having tossed out that last statement, Xianpei did not spare Jiang Dan another look as he brushed past her. Jiang Dan didn't dare to linger. She always felt a sense of déjà vu when she looked at Xianpei's eyes because they were just like Zhang Ruan's. Whenever those eyes were fixed on her, it seemed that everything in her heart was being scrutinized and exposed. And everything she did was just like a clown performing on the beams. Aside from doing things that were gratuitous and futile, there was nothing worthy left behind. She kept walking forward, and in such a state of haste and anxiousness she actually bumped into someone. The eunuch next to that person demanded angrily, "Who is this person without eyes? You actually bumped into Fifth Highness." Jiang Dan was startled and lifted her head. Sure enough, the man before her was indeed Xian Hua. The eunuch also recognized her, and smiled apologetically. "It's noble consort Jiang." Xian Hua had been very well behaved in the court recently, and he had not made any significant movement in a long while, but judging from Xian Li's attitude, it would appear that Xian Hua hadn't really raised the white flag and ceased to fight. Jiang Dan's scheming heart instantly took a turn. Recalling the feeling of trepidation that Xianpei had given her, and adding to the severe angst from being on edge awaiting Zhang Ruan's next move, suddenly an unexpected idea popped up. Without waiting for Xian Hua to say anything, she immediately greeted as she directed an acquiescent smile towards Xian Hua. "Fifth Highness." Xian Hua knew that Zhang Dan was currently favored by the emperor, so he didn't make things difficult for her, and said, "Noble consort Jiang. Just yesterday His Majesty was talking to me about Fifth Highness, and today Fifth Highness appears right before me. This is really a coincidence." Zhang Dan smiled. Xian Hua was taken aback. Since the last time he did something inappropriate, the emperor's attitude towards him had cooled down a bit, and these days he had been pretending to be humble and know his place, even to the point that he had not engaged in any disagreement with Xianli on the surface. Who would have known that Zhang Dan would suddenly bring up this matter? And his heart moved. He couldn't help but ask, "Imperial Father really mentioned me?" "Of course it's true." Zhang Dan blinked her eyes. "Speaking of which, this concubine and Fifth Highness seem to really get along. Why don't we go to the tea pavilion over there and play a game of chess? We could also have a chat. His Majesty has told me many interesting things about Fifth Highness." Xian Hua was not a fool. The emperor might make mention of him, but it was absolutely impossible to tell Zhang Dan any interesting and amusing things about him. For Zhang Dan to say this, she must have something else to discuss, and the pleasantries were just a mere cover. Although he was a little suspicious and unsure of what Zhang Dan was up to, when he looked at Zhang Dan's expression, he still relented and finally smiled. "Just as well, I was also thinking of playing a game of chess. Noble consort Jiang, please lead the way." There was no impropriety nor blunder in imperial social decorum for a prince who happened to walk past and decided to play chess with an imperial consort. Zhang Dan and Xian Hua walked to the gazebo in the middle of the imperial garden, where a chess set was placed at the pavilion all year round. The two of them set up the game. The eunuch and maid stood far away, and white and black pieces were moved on the chessboard, but the thoughts of the two chess players were not on the game. "Noble consort Jiang, you may as well come straight to the point and say what it is you're after." Xian Hua lost his patience after placing his third chess piece. Xian Hua's temperament was no way near the forbearance level of Xian Li, and he really was more impetuous and easily irritable. It's hard to imagine that someone as earnest and staid as imperial consort could give birth to such an impetuous person like Xian Hua. Zhang Dan smiled facetiously, but there was a sharp sword embedded in her words. His Majesty only has 4 princes now, and he speaks about Fifth Highness. Naturally, he would also mention other princes. However, recently, His Majesty has tended to bring up 13th Prince with increasing frequency. Xian Hua frowned. 13th Prince. Suddenly his heart began to race. Presently, Xianpei's popularity and favor within the imperial courts was becoming increasingly more and more prominent. Xian Hua had originally thought that it was just rumors spread by the masses. A prince without his mother consort, no matter how much he was favored by the emperor, was not qualified to be the heir apparent to the throne after all. But Jiang Dan's next words totally rattled him. Jiang Dan said, at present, His Majesty especially loves 13th Prince very much. Maybe it is out of pity since he had lost his mother at an early age, because His Majesty has gone so far as to rally some of the older court officials in secret, and has asked that they wholeheartedly support and assist him. It was glaringly obvious to anyone the rationale behind the emperor seeking the help of the older court officials to assist and support a prince, and that was to prepare the way for the future heir apparent to the throne. The emperor was assembling and cultivating valuable talent for Xian Pei. A black chess piece in Xianhua's hand landed on the chessboard with a loud thud, as he laughed chillingly. Noble consort Zhang can surely jest. There is nothing I can do if Fifth Highness does not believe anything I've just said. The white chess piece that Jiang Dan was holding in her fingers was placed down in quick succession. It's just that I reside within the palace, so naturally I have a clearer understanding of what's happening within. And as a woman I also hope to find someone to rely on. Although at present His Majesty treats me well, there will come a day when he might no longer care for me. To exaggerate a little, in 100 years' time, who do I have that would care and protect me? Xianhua heard Jiang Dan's words, but lowered his voice in response. Noble consort Zhang's words are indeed an over-exaggeration, and is truly overthinking too much. Jiang Dan smiled. At present, 13th Prince is gradually gaining more and more of His Majesty's favor and affection, and isn't there a common saying that it is better to strike while the iron is hot to gain the upper hand? Imperial Grand Tutor Lu was originally meant to be the Crown Prince's tutor, but when I was passing by the garden this morning, I happened to see him together with 13th Prince. His Majesty has already bestowed Imperial Grand Tutor Lu to 13th Prince. This really is a thoughtful gesture. Lu Min was an upstart in the imperial court, but any officials who were young in age and had pledged their loyalty and allegiance to the emperor were often reserved and groomed for the next emperor. Xianhua had long known that Lu Min was given to Xian Pei as a tutor, but with Jiang Dan blatantly stating it out loud, he could no longer contain the melancholy that he had tried hard to suppress over the past few days. In a haphazard manner he randomly placed the black chess piece that was in his hand. Before lowering his voice, he asked, "What exactly do you want to say?" "The relationship between 13th Prince and my Dejejia is very close. Unfortunately, Dejejia and I had a misunderstanding a few years ago, and now we are at opposing ends like fire and water. 13th Prince looks upon me like a thorn in his side, and as for 8th Prince, he too has intentions to win over Jinying Wang, and does not even stand the sight of me. After much consideration, it seems that only 5th Highness can offer me security and protection within this vast deep palace." Jiang Dan's eyes dimmed. She was born petite, and was used to appearing cute, and that particular kind of appearance could indeed arouse a man's instinct to protect. After all, Xianhua was also a man. He had seen countless beauties over the years, but Jiang Dan indeed had a bit of a charisma, so instantly he softened his attitude and smiled. "Why do you think that only this prince is able to protect you?" Such words were much like a man poking fun at a girl. Jiang Dan shook her head. "When it comes to good bearing and looks, or the skills required for an emperor, I feel that overall 13th Prince, 8th Prince and even the Crown Prince aren't even able to compare to 5th Highness. I just hope that when the day comes that 5th Highness has attained the pinnacle of his endeavors, that you would not forget the conversation you and I had on this day, and that deep within this palace, you would offer me a safe haven. For this I would be deeply grateful." Xianhua always liked to listen to the flattery from others, and Jiang Dan's words really bolstered his self-esteem. Aside from Xian Pei and the Crown Prince, just Xianli alone was someone everyone had compared him with ever since his childhood. Xianli was talented and intelligent, and everyone always said that Xianhua could not match up to him. But at this moment Jiang Dan said he was the best. Instantly, all his suspicion and doubts about Jiang Dan dissipated, and he began to find Jiang Dan slightly more appealing. "Since you have spoken, you must already have an idea, so let's hear it," Xianhua said. Jiang Dan looked at him and said slowly, "Your Highness, don't you think that with the chaotic situation at the moment, delaying and dragging out the situation would actually give others the opportunity to gain the upper hand? Why don't we make use of this chaos to eliminate our enemies? A man of character shouldn't ever be fearful and nervous, afraid of every single thing. Instead he should have courage and a plan. That's what a real man is like." Her every word carried a kind of enticement, and Xianhua could hear his heart immediately race with excitement, eager to give it a go. He was naturally impetuous, and he was only able to stay level-headed and rein in his impulses because of Imperial Consort Da's daily reminders. But these days, he had reached his limit in keeping with Imperial Consort Da's guidelines to bear things quietly and patiently. Zhang Dan's words hit that very spot in his heart that wished to go out and do something grand, so he said, "Carry on. As far as I know, De Jiejie and 13th Highness are getting better and better. Because of the relationship with De Jiejie, the genieing Wangfu will sooner or later stand on the side of 13th Prince. The genie guards are numbered around 300,000, and should they ally themselves with 13th Prince, that would be really detrimental to 5th Highness." Xianhua snorted coldly. 13th Prince sure has got some good strategies. To think that he appeared all harmless and helpless, only to lure everyone into a false sense of safety and let their guard down around him. I should have known when suddenly all things good and favorable were all bestowed upon him. All this transpired because of his ability to pretend to be naive and an imbecile. Well, now he has revealed his ambition and has begun to plan and scheme covertly. Having said that, a worried expression surfaced on his face. One ought to know that genieing Wang in Great Jin was not someone to be underestimated. If Xianpei had gained the support of the genieing Wangfu, that would be equivalent to him having already gained half of the country, and it would be even more difficult to deal with him in the future. Zhang Dan said softly, "When my mother Xia Yan was still alive, she once said this to me. If there was ever any situation that could pose a threat, then it was best to quench it when it was still a young shoot. In this way it would never be able to grow up, and thus would never become a threat to you." This was what Xia Yan said to her at that time, in order to have her poison Zhao Mei, but at the end what she said unwittingly became the catalyst to her, and she resolved in her heart to poison Zhang Ruan's food too. It's just that she was too timid at that time to continue, otherwise she would have eradicated all future disasters, and she wouldn't be in such a conundrum today. Xianhua was startled, and looked at Zhang Dan suspiciously. "You mean?" At this moment, 13th Prince is but a child, and there have already been many princes in the palace who died at such an age. Zhang Dan's voice was soft, but her words were ruthless. Besides, it would only require a little trickery. 13th Prince is presently someone whom His Majesty values, but 5th Highness and His Majesty have also already established 20 years of father-son relationship. In saying so, 5th Highness and His Majesty should be much closer. Taking advantage of the fact that His Majesty 13th Prince's relationship isn't that strong, it is best to be swift and resolute in taking the necessary steps to deal with this complication. Xianhua didn't seem to expect that Zhang Dan would say such a thing, and after looking at her for some time, he suddenly laughed. "It turns out that noble consort Zhang has indeed come prepared. Why, you even have designs to make use of me." Aptly, Zhang Dan put on a panic-stricken posture. This concubine wouldn't dare. It's just for self-preservation. "Okay then, carry on with what you're saying. What do you think I should do?" Xianhua finally understood that Zhang Dan also had her own hidden agenda, but what she said coincided with his intentions, and there was some truth in it, so he didn't quibble about it. Since De Jiejie is close to 13th Prince, we might as well lump them together. After all, it is possible for these two to definitely commit a serious blunder together, and in this way your Highness would remove the thorn in your side, and I would also find some respite. Zhang Dan smiled slightly. Everyone would be happy. After walking for a while, Xianpei and Lu Min stood in front of Nan Huayuan. Xianpei turned to Lu Min and said, "Imperial Grand Tutor Lu should head back. There are still some things that I have to get done today, and I will have my homework presented to the Imperial Grand Tutor Lu tomorrow." Lu Min knew that Xianpei always had ideas, so he didn't insist. Instead, he bowed and took his leave. After Lu Min left, Xianpei's expression changed, and he called for Mingyu. In a serious voice he instructed, "Go quickly to the place where we met Zhang Dan just now. Be sure to find her and keep a close eye on her. If anything happens, immediately report back to me." Mingyu received her orders and departed. Chaoyang said, "Your Highness, do you sense something amiss with noble consort Jiang?" Xianpei's eyes darkened. Something was definitely amiss. Zhang Dan had always been meticulous, but today she had repeatedly revealed her emotions. He was well aware of Jiang Quan's situation, and it looked like Jiang Dan was getting antsy. She was beginning to show her foxtail and he wouldn't mind catching this tail. There was no reason to refuse a prey who delivered itself to the front door, especially when it was courting death. Chapter 206. Chapter 206. Xiao Xiao's background. In the 8th Prince Fu, Xianli threw a letter into the flames beside him. They licked at the words on the paper and quickly turned them into a pile of ashes in an instant. Finally, the advisor behind him couldn't help but ask, "Why did your highness refuse noble consort Zhang's intentions?" Jiang Dan had proposed forming an alliance with Xianli to bring down the Jining Wangfu, and anyone who heard her proposal would be tempted. Since Jiang Dan had put forth the idea, it clearly showed her intent. Furthermore, with Xianli's cautious temperament, he ought to have heard her out, but he had directly rejected her without any hesitation, which was truly strange. She's agitated now, which is why she's losing her composure. It seems that Zhang Ruan has some handle on her, thus she wants to use me while dealing with Jining Wangfu at the same time. But what brilliant methods could she have? Anyway, it's not worth it for me to give her a hand. Xianli looked at the dancing flames and said, "Moreover, this woman is shrewd and cunning, and is already colluding with 5th Prince." The advisor followed Xianli's eyes and looked at the flames, guessing that he had probably received a secret communique from the palace. For Jiang Dan to ally with Xianhua in such a short period of time, this really showed how frantic and anxious she was. The advisor muttered irresolutely, "Then what your highness is implying is, she's just a fool." Xianli responded indifferently. Of course it would be great if those two people could unite to bring down the Jining Wangfu, since the existence of Xiao Xiao is always a stumbling block. One day I will have to get rid of this obstacle, but since someone wants to help me with the task, why shouldn't I be happy? He seemed rather amused as he said, "But if they aren't a match for Xiao Xiao, with Xiao Xiao and Zhang Ruan's temperaments, do you think they will achieve anything good?" Xianli continued, "Of late, 5th Prince has become a nuisance in the imperial court, and added to that is Xian Pei. If 5th Prince were to disappear from this world, that would indeed be fortuitous for me." He looked at a golden button on his sleeve and said, "Anyway, I have nothing to lose, so why would I dip my hand into this unpleasant muddy water?" "Your highness is wise." The advisor sighed. "When the sandpiper and the clam fight, the fisherman benefits. Either way, your highness will just get to reap all the benefits." He thought for a while and suddenly said, "It's just that noble consort Zhang was your highness person, and now that she has suddenly colluded with 5th Prince, that means we can't make use of her anymore. Since she is no longer of any benefit, then in future, news from the palace. Yu Bangxiangxing Yu Wingdali. Lit. When the snipe and the clam grapple with each other, the fisherman catches them both. Figure when two sides are locked in dispute, it's often a third party that benefits." She was useless to begin with. Xianli interrupted him. "Yuan Chuan has already arrived in the palace, so what need is there for Jiang Dan? I may as well take advantage of her one last time. And if she can help me with this, then our encounter will not have been a total waste." The advisor nodded. "In that case, your highness can await good news with peace of mind. Your highness is indeed the best chess player. At the final stage, it is your highness who will bring the game to an end." Zhang Ruan stretched and subconsciously hugged the source of warmth in her arms. She blearily opened her eyes, only to find that her arms were still around Xiao Xiao's waist, and Xiao Xiao's peacefully sleeping face was before her. The sunlight shone faintly through the curtain, also illuminating her chaotic mind a little bit. All at once she remembered what had happened yesterday. She had been retelling the story of her previous life, making a clean breast of things, and in the end she had kissed Xiao Xiao without knowing why. Moved by sudden emotion, Xiao Xiao had taken the opportunity to carry her out of the study while she was in a daze. Perhaps the tide of emotion diluted the suffering because in the intensity of their sweaty, intimate moment, all her painful emotions were released. And then Zhang Ruan was slightly taken aback, feeling the pain all over her body as if she had been totally crushed. She had to say that Xiao Xiao was really clever. He could master after one try what others needed several attempts to learn. Even in these matters it was the same. Where did such a wonderful coincidence come from? It almost made her dizzy with an unfamiliar sense of bliss. It's just that normally this person was calm and detached, but for some reason his conduct in bed was extremely evil. Moreover, afterwards, the one who had been bullied in bed could not speak even a word except to look at the perpetrator coldly and struggle to admit defeat. She propped up her chin with one hand, and carefully looked at the young man who was lying on his side. Xiao Xiao's eyelashes were long and straight, and very sharply defined under his closed eyes. The bridge of his nose was high and straight, and the lips were thin and rosy. In sleep, Xiao Xiao looked very peaceful, so it was hard to imagine the nighttime sweat and crazed movements of such a calm and indifferent person. As long as there were those memories in her mind, she felt a little embarrassed. While she was thinking, someone pulled at her hand, and she fell into a warm embrace. Xiao Xiao's eyes were not open, but his voice was very clear, and he said with a touch of satisfaction, like a glutton after a meal, "It's still early." Tao Tai. A monster in Chinese mythology which has become symbolic of greed and gluttony. "It's getting late," Zhang Ruan replied, then reacted and said, "Are you awake?" As the corners of Xiao Xiao's lips curled up, he opened his eyes and looked at her and said, "Eng." As long as this person was not in front of his subordinates, he showed his evil nature behind his sincere front, and was occasionally very childish, seeming to think that playing tricks on people was great fun. In Zhang Ruan's eyes, this kind of behavior was very similar to Xian Pei's. It's just that it was cute when Xian Pei did these things, but it was rather weird when done by someone like Xiao Xiao, who normally had a cold expression on his face. "You." Zhang Ruan pushed him, but Xiao Xiao didn't let go. He was already very strong, so as long as he employed a little skill, Zhang Ruan couldn't do anything. At this moment, she had no choice but to lie in his arms. Recalling something, she asked, "I told you about those things yesterday, but in the end I didn't hear what you had to say. When do you plan to share?" Upon thinking about her own revelation, Zhang Ruan felt very uncomfortable. Yesterday, she had been very emotional, and all the Wangfu's servants had probably noticed when Xiao Xiao carried her back to the room. What would those people think? As soon as Wang Fei returned to the Wangfu, she couldn't wait to get intimate with Master in the study in broad daylight. Would she seem too lustful? As for Steward Lin, he would be even more suspicious. She was going to tell Xiao Xiao a secret, so how did she end up talking about it on the bed? Now that she had completely lost face, Zhang Ruan only felt that it would be more difficult to establish her authority in the eyes of the servants, and she couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Xiao Xiao paused momentarily and said, "Yesterday you were too impatient. I thought you wanted to do more important things." "More important things?" Zhang Ruan stared at him and said, "What do you consider more important?" It's clear that this person harbored an ulterior motive. He might originally have wanted to comfort her gently, but this scoundrel took advantage of her difficulties. Xiao Xiao couldn't help laughing again. Zhang Ruan stared at him for a while, then laughed too. She pushed Xiao Xiao and said, "All right, get up first. I don't have anything to do today. I can listen to what you want to say." She joked, "Even if you say that you, like me, have died once, I won't hold it against you." "Oh. If you want to listen, I'll tell you." Xiao Xiao stroked her hair and said, "Get up first." After breakfast, Zhang Ruan and Xiao Xiao went to the courtyard. The gazebo in the yard was adjacent to the pond. Its water was green and blue, and it was so clear that they could see right to the bottom. The red fish swimming around within embellished the monotony of this winter day, being exceptionally lively. Zhang Ruan was thinking about Xiao Xiao's words. Crown Prince Hong. She was the crown prince in name, but his position was not very stable, not to mention his 7 exceedingly ambitious brothers. Even within the imperial court, there weren't many officials that supported him. The former emperor left everything in shambles for Empress Dowager Ida. Yet wanted Crown Prince Hong Shi to figure out how to resolve this chaotic state of affairs. Each of the 8 brothers made a claim for kingship and sought to seize the position by force. Empress Dowager Ida had no other recourse except to seek foreign aid. At that time one appeared, the princess of South Xinjiang. Qiman. Crown Prince Hong Shi not only possessed both ability and political integrity, he loved his nation. Also, he was born incomparably handsome and elegant. At that time, South Xinjiang had not yet been destroyed, and its strength could not be sneered at. Their princess met Crown Prince Hongxi when she made the long journey to Great Jin, and secretly set her heart on him. Unfortunately, Crown Prince Hongxi politely declined. The wife of Crown Prince Hongxi was Xiang Xiaoyuan, the first female physician in the Great Jin dynasty. Although Xiang Xiaoyuan was not as beautiful as Qi Man, she had good medical skills and many novel, strange ideas. She was not born into a noble family, but was from the mountains. She had once saved a first-rank cabinet minister on the brink of death, and it was said that she had performed some kind of surgery. Thus, she entered the palace and obtained the official position of a female physician. It took Crown Prince Hongxi a lot of sleepless nights and perseverance to marry her in the end, but fortunately, he was finally able to embrace this beauty. Crown Prince Hongxi had always steered clear of other women, and he and Xiang Xiaoyuan were genuinely in love with each other. Therefore, once Xiang Xiaoyuan arrived in the back quarters as the Crown Prince's wife, the bed servants were all quietly dismissed. Thus, there was no way Crown Prince Hongxi would agree with the proposal from the South Xinjiang princess to get rid of Xiang Xiaoyuan and marry Princess Qi Man. It's just that this was irrational in the eyes of Empress Dowager Ida. While it was true that she also very much liked Xiang Xiaoyuan's intelligence and perspective that was different from other women's, no wise king would give up the great cause of the nation for a woman. Perhaps Crown Prince Hongxi was indeed not a competent heir to the throne. His heart was not ruthless enough, but he was indeed a good husband and father. Qi Man let it be known that if Crown Prince Hongxi agreed to her proposal, South Xinjiang would lend Great Jin 100,000 soldiers to help calm the rebellion of the other princes. Crown Prince Hongxi would not agree, but the present emperor was different. The emperor and Crown Prince Hongxi had been close since childhood. The two brothers had thought the same way about everything when they were young, even the kind of women they liked. Xiang Xiaoyuan was intelligent and different from other ladies. Crown Prince Hongxi liked her, and so did the emperor. However, in Xiang Xiaoyuan's eyes, the emperor was simply a little brother, and so he could only watch her and his older brother get married. Perhaps because of jealousy and the unwillingness to let her go in his heart, or because he was more suitable to be an emperor than Crown Prince Hongxi, the present emperor promised Princess Qi Man that he would find a way to let her get Crown Prince Hongxi first, and then have her send troops to help Great Jin. His original intention was actually just to use this as a stopgap measure because he thought it would be merely a physical relationship, and Crown Prince Hongxi would not lose anything in the end. As long as Princess Qi Man was temporarily appeased, after the rebellion of the 8 princes had been quashed, he would find a reason to kick her away. The only variable was Xiang Xiaoyuan. In terms of emotions and feelings, Xiang Xiaoyuan was different from any woman in this world. She believed that a man could only have one woman in his life, and it was a sin to have many wives and concubines. This was an outrageous perspective to have in Great Jin, but Crown Prince Hongxi agreed. No matter how many people pressured them at that time, Crown Prince Hongxi's attitude remained resolute. The emperor knew that he could not be like Crown Prince Hongxi, and in his heart he could not help but mock them as he waited to see the look of disappointment on Xiaoyuan's face. It was impossible to know how many variables would be thrown up if Xiang Xiaoyuan had known about this matter, but for the sake of Great Jin, or maybe also because of the dark thoughts in the emperor's heart, he finally made a decision that he would regret for the rest of his life. Chapter 207. Chapter 207. All kinds of pasts. At that time, Xiang Xiaoyuan had recently given birth to Xiao Xiao, and he had just reached his first month. On the day of the full moon celebration, the wine flowed freely, countless guests came and went, and the scene was very lively. Manue. Full moon/whole month/baby's 1-month-old birthday. In ancient China, the infant mortality rate used to be very high. Hence, when a baby turns 1 month old, it calls for a great celebration. The new parents gave gifts to friends and relatives in celebration. These include eggs that had been dyed red, the color of happiness, and other foods. Well-wishers would bring presents for the baby as well. And the day ended with a large dinner for friends and family. In the midst of all the festivities, it was unknown how Princess Qi Man and Crown Prince Hongxi ended up in bed, but the current emperor must have put in quite some effort to achieve this goal. However, when Xiang Shaoyuan saw the scene before her that day, contrary to everyone's expectations, she did not lose her temper. She continued to talk and laugh quietly, almost as if there hadn't been any mishaps on this day. This both prevented Crown Prince Hongxi from losing face, and also made Princess Qi-man, who was essentially the perpetrator who anticipated watching the ensuing excitement, to be completely silenced and left speechless. Later on, Xiang Shaoyuan personally arranged for, and had Princess Qi-man brought in marriage to Crown Prince Hongxi. Xiang Shaoyuan had a fiery temper, and unlike most people's expectation, she was very possessive when it came to matters of the heart. Nevertheless, she was still someone who saw the bigger picture. Sometimes in life one had to prioritize certain things above one's emotions, and for the sake of the peace of the great Jin dynasty, she could only silently swallow the unpleasant feelings in her heart. Crown Prince Hongxi was plotted against by his own younger brother, and hated Princess Qi-man very much, but he had to compromise and accept the situation. However, this made him feel more pity for his wife and made him even more tender towards her. Not only did the two not have an estrangement because of this matter, but they became even closer. As for Princess Qi-man, although she lived in the palace, the two acted as if there was no such person. Perhaps because everyone underestimated South Xinjiang's princess methods, or assumed that because she was just a woman, she probably wouldn't be able to make any more trouble. Therefore, who could have imagined that her jealousy was so entrenched that Princess Qi-man couldn't bear the fact that while her beloved treated her with contempt, he spoke tenderly to another. The people from South Xinjiang are good at using witchcraft, and she wanted to gain control over Xiang Shaoyuan. So she planted an extremely terrifying goo poison inside Xiang Shaoyuan's body. She originally wanted to use her to control Crown Prince Hongxi, but Xiang Shaoyuan was a strong and spirited person. She knew very well that the crown prince of a country and the future emperor shouldn't be controlled by a woman, so she hastily left on her own accord. Her medical skills were superb, so she intended to find a place to detoxify and purge the goo herself. However, if she was unsuccessful, it was better to die outside. Goo. Arch-legendary venomous insects / to poison / to bewitch / to drive to insanity / to harm by witchcraft / intestinal parasite. Destiny always silently strikes people down with fatal blows, and Xiang Shaoyuan's departure turned out to be the last time she parted from Crown Prince Hongxi. In the end, she was unable to dispel the goo poison, and not long after, someone came to the palace door with Xiang Shaoyuan's ashes. That person was none other than Teacher Ba Qi. Although Teacher Ba Qi was older than Xiang Shaoyuan, he could be regarded as Xiang Shaoyuan's disciple. Before Xiang Shaoyuan left for the capital, she had lived in the mountains with Teacher Ba Qi. Xiang Shaoyuan taught and imparted all of her medical knowledge to him, and Ba Qi inherited her medical skills and recognized her as a young Shifu. Crown Prince Hongxi suffered a huge blow and wanted to kill Princess Qi-man, but Empress Dowager Ida stopped him. The Genie Guard had always been under the command of the Jinying Wangfu, but Jinying Wang belonged to Crown Prince Hongxi. The 300,000 Genie Guards were not so much left to Xiao Xiao by Jinying Wang, but rather by Crown Prince Hongxi many years ago. It's just that before this time, Xiao Xiao had never accepted the mantle of leadership of the Genie Guard, and the Genie Guard would also not obey a little master for no reason. However, in a few short years, Xiao Xiao learned the art of assassins on MT. Jianan grew rapidly, finally won the approval of the Genie Guard, and was able to use the token to mobilize soldiers, and the first thing he wanted to do was exact revenge. South Xinjiang was like a centipede that was dead but not stiff. Although the country had been destroyed long ago, the remaining forces had repeatedly tried to make a comeback. Princess Qi-man's old subordinates were beginning to become restless, waiting for an opportunity to take action against Great Jin. In his younger days, Xiao Xiao had deeply infiltrated South Xinjiang countless times, and he discovered a very mysterious and strong force that had the ability to unite those scattered South Xinjiang people. Although it seemed unremarkable on the surface, their ultimate goal seemed to be to face off against Great Jin one day. Sire Bujiang. Dead but showing no signs of rigor mortis / to die hard / to die yet not be vanquished. After Xiao Xiao finished speaking, Jiang Ruan looked at him quietly. From beginning to end, Xiao Xiao's expression was very calm, and his long eyelashes veiled his eyes, making it impossible for anyone to clearly read his emotions. It seemed like he was used to not revealing his thoughts like this, or maybe it was because he had been through so much in his lifetime that there was hardly anything that could easily cause him pain anymore. Jiang Ruan walked slowly to his side, and put her arms around his waist because no matter who it was, it would be comforting to feel some warmth at this time. Xiao Xiao's body froze and seemed to tremble before he slowly reached out to return her embrace. Since you don't want to enter the palace to be the emperor, and he treats you like this, why bother with the affairs of South Xinjiang? Jiang Ruan said softly, you want revenge and you can't let it go. Is that why? Naturally the he referred to the emperor, who seemed to be playing a very unpleasant role in the whole thing. Perhaps it was because of his position, but in Jiang Ruan's view, among the children of Empress Dowager Ida, Crown Prince Hongxi and the current emperor were not suitable for the position of the throne. Rather, Princess Yuanrong, who was imposing, impressive and composed, was more suited. However, it was a pity that she was born a daughter and hence not given the same opportunity. Crown Prince Hongxi was too soft-hearted and emotional, so he was more suited to be an idle young man, unconstrained and carefree. And the current emperor was like a spoiled child. Although he had changed a lot over the years because of his high position, he was still at the core the same as always, selfish and willful. This is something they sacrificed themselves for at the expense of their own lives. Nevertheless, I have to guard it. Xiao Xiao replied lightly. Either they referred to Crown Prince Hongxi and Xiang Xiaoyuan, or Jinying Wang and his wife. The former were Xiao Xiao's biological parents and the latter were his adoptive parents, but regardless, they had all loved him exactly the same. Xiao Xiao's words were honest. Even if he didn't want to sit on the throne of the country that his closest relatives sacrificed their lives for, he still didn't want it to decline and be invaded by outsiders. Do you hate him? Jiang Ruan asked. She was talking about the emperor. If it wasn't for the emperor, nothing would have happened to Xiang Xiaoyuan back then, and Crown Prince Hongxi wouldn't have gone out disheartened, his heart hell-bent on destroying everything as he headed out to quell the unrest. If it weren't for the emperor, Xiao Xiao's background would always remain a secret, and he might just be Xiao Wang of the Jinying Wangfu, a young man with a slightly cold temper. Jinying Wang and his wife might also still be alive. It's not important, Xiao Xiao replied. Jiang Ruan paused slightly and then smiled. In this way you are somewhat similar to me. At first I thought I was not worthy of you, but now I also feel. Seems that it is not so bad. You once said that you hope to help me take revenge. Xiao, I will also aid in your vengeance as well. It was rare for Jiang Ruan to call him Xiao so tenderly, hence Xiao Xiao was stunned and could only utter him in a low voice. Jiang Ruan blinked, intending to tell him not to immerse himself in those memories so heavily, and continued, this being the case, Steward Lin is probably not an ordinary person either. He is your father's old subordinate? He was originally a scholar who ranked third in the imperial examination in the previous dynasty, Xiao Xiao said. After my father passed away, he entered the Jinying Wangfu as a housekeeper, hiding his identity. Jiang Ruan was surprised. Third-rank scholar in the imperial examination. Steward Lin's original name was Lin Wei. He came from a poor family, and was appreciated by Crown Prince Hongxi, who provided him financial aid to enter the Imperial Academy. This young third-rank imperial scholar had an elegant demeanor, was resplendently attired, quite popular, and was also a confidant to Crown Prince Hongxi. Crown Prince Hongxi entrusted Xiao Xiao to Jinying Wang before his death. At that time, Lin Wei had no family or relatives, so he went so far as to end his official career, announcing his resignation and his intention to return to his hometown and enter into seclusion. In actual fact, he suppressed and hid his very own identity, to the extent of administering the face-changing potion prepared by teacher Ba Qi, hence evolving himself into Steward Lin, so that he could take care of Xiao Xiao. Over the years, although he seemed unreliable, in actual fact, he had always silently helped Xiao Xiao with many things. Where Jinying Wang and his wife were negligent, Steward Lin was very cautious. He was a learned man, intelligent and knowledgeable, but he had to pretend to be coarse and ignorant. No one would associate the coarse and tacky loudmouth person in front of them with the handsome imperial scholar from the previous dynasty. Steward Lin, in his own way, subtly taught and influenced Xiao Xiao on a lot of things. Such a person could only be said to have great benevolence, righteousness, and immense knowledge and wisdom. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.